Picture this, okay? You're out at an ATM and it's late at night. It's pitch dark, you're totally alone, and suddenly that sinking feeling hits you. You aren't safe. I mean, we've all heard the warnings about being careful in the dark, right? But if you actually came face to face with a monster in some dimly lit parking lot, what would you really do? Would you fight for your life? Would you run away as fast as you could? Or would you just freeze up in complete panic? Well, today we're looking at a deeply harrowing story from 1998 where an anonymous woman at a Bank of America ATM in Lodi, California had to answer that exact question in a split second. Let's get into it.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely chilling real-life story, the Speed Freak Killers. It's a dark tale about a deadly duo, an absolute ultimate betrayal, and honestly, the life-saving importance of just trusting your human instinct.
Section 1. A terrifying near miss.
So let's go back to late 1998. A young woman was just making a quick deposit at a drive-through ATM. And back in those days, you actually had to physically step out of your car to grab a deposit envelope. So she does that, hops back into her two-door Monte Carlo, and her gut instinct immediately screams at her to lock the doors. Literally moments later, a car screeches to a dead halt right next to her. She looks up, and there's this tall, white guy with a long, braided blonde ponytail standing right outside her passenger door. The absolute terror on his face made her act instantly. Because she had already locked those doors, she was able to just slam the key, throw the car in reverse, and peel out into the night. It was an unbelievably close call. And it turns out she had likely just escaped a brush with two of California's most prolific killers.
Section 2. The Speed Freak Killers.
The guys she likely narrowly escaped were Wesley Shermantine and Lauren Herzog. These two were childhood best friends from a tiny farming town called Linden, California, and their dynamic was really something else. Experts basically view Wesley as the arrogant mastermind behind the whole operation. He came from an affluent background, but his family had these dark secrets and this reputation where you didn't cross them. Lauren, on the other hand, was this huge guy, over 6 feet tall, but he acted way more as the passive, compliant follower to whatever Wesley wanted to do. But make no mistake, they were both absolutely responsible for the utter devastation they caused.
Which brings us to their terrifying nickname, the Speed Freak Killers. Now, by the time they graduated high school back in 1984, they were already known as major troublemakers. But their real descent into becoming suspected serial killers directly lined up with their heavy, violent abuse of methamphetamine. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Authorities and theorists firmly believe this behavior-altering drug was the catalyst for their killing frenzies, sparking this deadly streak that started when they were literally just teenagers.
Section 3. Vanished without a trace.
The true nightmare really became public in 1985. That's when 16-year-old Chevy Wheeler vanished after skipping school to hang out with Wesley. And this is where the timeline just gets staggering. The police actually found blood matching Chevy's type inside Wesley's hunting cabin that very same year. But because DNA tech just wasn't advanced enough yet to press charges, Wesley basically walked away with this smug nonchalance. That led to a horrifying 14-year gap between their most high-profile disappearances. 14 years! They evaded justice for well over a decade, just continuing their terror completely unchecked.
And the sheer scale of the devastation during that time, it's mind-boggling. Some experts estimate that this duo might have orchestrated up to 72 murders between 1984 and 1999. 72. They would often lure young women into their vehicles, promising them drugs, only to put them through unimaginable cruelty for what seems like absolutely no reason other than their own sick, impulsive satisfaction.
Section 4. The Interrogation Room Betrayal.
But eventually, the house of cards had to fall. Their downfall really started after 25-year-old Cindy Vanderheiden vanished in 1998. Police found blood in Wesley's car, and this time, science was on their side. They had the leverage. DNA analysis proved the blood was Cindy's. The odds, 169 million to 1. That scientific certainty was the absolute silver bullet they needed to finally shatter that lifelong bond between the two friends.
So the police bring Lauren in first. At first, he's totally defensive, completely tight-lipped. But as the interrogators started planting these seeds of doubt, Lauren just crumbled. He went into a full panic. He started detailing this horrific night where they were all smoking meth and Wesley assaulted Cindy before taking her life. Lauren tried to paint himself as just this comatose bystander, claiming he sat in the car telling his friend, "Wes, don't kill her, man," while Wesley supposedly just boasted, "I'm not going to prison."
Now, compare Lawrence panicked, spilling his guts confession with Wesley. When interrogators sat Wesley down and threw that 169 million to 1 DNA evidence in his face, he was just cold, smug. He stubbornly denied it all, just shrugging and saying, "Then I don't know how it got in there." And when they pressed him harder, Wesley completely shut down, demanded a lawyer, and instantly threw his so-called best friend under the bus, claiming Lauren had actually pulled a gun on him before.
Boom. Just like that, decades of intense loyalty evaporated into thin air. They basically became archenemies right there in the interrogation rooms. Lauren even went on to pin other gruesome, previously unsolved murders entirely on Wesley. He told them about a Utah hunter who was shot for literally no reason back in 1994, and a man named Henry Howell who was brutally beaten to death on the side of a highway just so Wesley could steal his shotgun.
Section 5. Fallout and Retaliation. When the trials rolled around in 2001, the legal system treated these two very differently. Wesley was found guilty of 4 murders and slapped with the death penalty. Though, unbelievably, he actually tried to arrogantly sell the locations of his victims' bodies for 20 grand so he could give the money to his sons. Meanwhile, Loren, who the courts viewed as the accomplice, initially got 78 years. But then, in this wild twist, Loren's sentence was actually overturned in 2004 because of coerced statements during his interrogation. By 2010, Loren was out on parole, living in a trailer just outside the prison because the public outrage was so intense.
As you can imagine, Wesley, sitting on death row, was absolutely furious that his partner got off so easily. So in one final act of vindictive revenge, Wesley actually accepted a $30,000 bounty to draw up these detailed maps showing where the secret grave sites were. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew those bodies held evidence that would destroy Lauren's newfound freedom. And Lauren knew it too. Realizing his time was completely up, Lauren was found dead in his trailer in January 2012. He had taken his own life.
Section 6. Always trust your gut.
Which brings us full circle right back to that anonymous survivor at the ATM. Because she trusted her gut, she didn't become just another tragic marker on Wesley's map. And yeah, while it's impossible to prove with 100% certainty, the coincidences are just chilling. The late 1998 timeline perfectly matched the active period around Cindy's disappearance. The city of Lodi was super close to their hometown of Linden. That tall, terrifying blonde guy, a perfect match for Lauren Herzog. And on top of all that, Wesley later bragged from prison that only one woman had ever escaped them. He claimed it was at a gas station, sure, but that's a pretty minor detail to mix up for a guy who was constantly high on meth.
And the craziest part? This isn't just ancient history. The true body count of the speed-freak killers is still an ongoing mystery. Just a few years ago, in March 2020, a local farmer actually discovered a human bone inside a deep, open well in San Joaquin County. It's just a haunting reminder that there are still loved ones out there waiting to be found in the duo's old stomping grounds.
That survivor from the ATM, she shared her story for one very crucial reason: awareness. Like she said, she wouldn't be here talking about it if she hadn't taken off the second she felt something was wrong. Her entire experience is this massive neon sign proving that it is always, always better to be safe than sorry. If a situation or a person triggers your internal alarms, listen to them.
Because unfortunately, there really are people in this world who want to take advantage of others for their own twisted pleasure. You honestly never know what monsters might be lurking in the dark. So I'll leave you with this to think about. The next time you find yourself in a dark parking lot and you get that sinking feeling that something is just off, will you trust your gut?
Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're exploring something truly mind-bending. 3 real-life cases with twists so unbelievably shocking, you'd think they were straight out of a Hollywood writer's room. But here's the crazy part. Every single detail you're about to hear is 100% real. Okay, let's dive right into this. What actually happens when reality just completely shatters our expectations? We're going to walk through an anthology of 3 chronological cases that will absolutely challenge your perception of reality. So brace yourself, because the twists we're uncovering today, they're going to leave you completely speechless. Case number 1, the girl with no past. So meet Sharon Marshall. On the surface, she seemed like this brilliant, super high-achieving teenager. She had this amazingly bright public persona, right? A lieutenant colonel in the ROTC who even scored a full-ride aerospace engineering scholarship to Georgia Tech. But behind closed doors, her private reality was incredibly chaotic. Back in high school, she was secretly pregnant, gave the baby up for adoption, lost her shot at college, and ended up moving down to Florida with a much, much older, aggressive guy named Frank Floyd. Soon after that, she had a second child, Michael, and had to rely on welfare and exotic dancing just to scrape by. Well, things escalated quickly, and super suspiciously. Sharon had a coworker friend named Cheryl Comesso. Cheryl actually ended up reporting Sharon to social services for hiding income, which instantly cut off Sharon's welfare. In retaliation, Frank violently punched Cheryl in the face right outside their work. And shortly after that, Cheryl just completely vanishes. Poof, gone. Frank and Sharon immediately fled under fake aliases. But before Sharon could pull off a plan to finally leave Frank, she was the victim of a highly suspicious hit and run, and later died in the hospital. The crazy thing is, the doctor actually classified her death as a homicide. He noted old bruises and head injuries that frankly just did not match up with a car accident. It is a terrifying sequence of events. $80,000. That's the life insurance policy Frank took out on Sharon just months before she died. But here's the catch. To claim that money, his fake aliases wouldn't work. His own greed literally forced him to give the insurance company his real full name, Franklin Delano Floyd. And boom, that instantly exposed his shocking criminal past, including a 1962 conviction for abducting a 4-year-old girl and even a bank robbery. So, with Frank's real identity exposed, he's sent back to prison and little Michael is placed in a really loving foster home. But when Frank gets released in 1994, it sets off this terrifying chain of events. First, a DNA test proves Frank isn't Michael's biological father, which completely stops his visitation rights. Enraged, Frank literally shows up at Michael's elementary school, holds Principal James Davis at gunpoint, ties him to a tree, kidnaps young Michael, and goes on the run. Frank was finally caught 2 months later in Kentucky, but tragically there was absolutely no sign of Michael. And this brilliantly illustrates how physical evidence ultimately caught up with him. In 1995, skeletal remains were discovered in Florida. Later that exact same year, a mechanic bought an abandoned, stolen truck that had been linked to Frank. Inside, an envelope stuffed with 97 horrific photos of a bound, beaten woman. Investigators actually matched a very specific cheekbone wound from those photos to the skull of the remains found earlier. It was Cheryl Comesso. That grim connection is what finally landed Frank on death row. But wait, it gets even darker. Those photos contained a second, older set of images showing a deeply disturbing crime: Frank assaulting a young girl. In 2014, investigators uncovered a twist so massive it honestly defies belief. Sharon Marshall wasn't who she thought she was. Her true identity? Suzanne Marie Savarkis. She was the daughter of a woman Frank had married way back in the 1970s. Frank had literally kidnapped his own stepdaughter, raised her under false aliases, subjected her to unthinkable abuse, eventually married her, and then kidnapped her child. To make matters worse, Frank finally admitted to shooting and killing little Michael. It is just a profoundly tragic end to a web of absolute evil and lies. Case number 2. The Anonymous Crow. All right, let's move across the globe to 1980s France. Jean-Marie and Christine Villman were a perfectly normal, happy couple who had just welcomed a bright baby boy named Gregory. But for years, this poor family was relentlessly tormented by anonymous, threatening phone calls and letters. Then the absolute unthinkable happened. 4-year-old Gregory was taken right from his front yard and tragically found bound and drowned in the Valone River. The very next day, this exact letter arrived from the anonymous killer, a person the French public dubbed the Crow. It read, "I hope you die of grief, boss. Your money won't bring back your son. Here's my revenge, you." Just chillin'. As you can imagine, the aftermath of little Gregory's murder just descended into absolute chaos. Let's look at this timeline. In 1985, Jean-Marie's cousin Bernard LaRoche was arrested based on a family statement, but he was later cleared. Then, in a completely shocking twist, on March 25th, handwriting experts pointed the finger at Gregory's own mother, Christine. Just 4 days later, absolutely refusing to believe his wife was guilty and entirely convinced his cousin was the actual killer, Jean-Marie took violent revenge. He shot and killed LaRoche right outside his workplace. The ripple effects of this case completely devastated everyone involved. Jean-Marie served prison time for the murder of his cousin. Christine, meanwhile, was officially charged with her own son's murder. She went on an 11-day hunger strike to protest her innocence, and she tragically miscarried a twin pregnancy before finally being cleared years later.
And, the trauma extended for decades. 33 years after Gregory's death, the original investigating magistrate actually took his own life, completely overwhelmed by the unbearable pressure and criticism of the unsolved case. But there is a glimmer of hope here. In December of 2020, the case was reopened, this time relying on a fascinating new technology called stylometrics. Basically, this is the intricate analysis of syntax, punctuation, and specific phrasing within those old threatening letters to identify an anonymous author. Armed with this tool, authorities have reportedly identified a new suspect. This leaves us with the very real possibility that the identity of the crow might finally, after all these years, be revealed.
Case number 3, the impossible imposter. So, back in 1994, 13-year-old Nicholas Barkley vanished in San Antonio, Texas. He was known as a pretty troubled youth, and he disappeared one night after his older brother Jason refused to give him a ride home. For 3 whole years, the family grieved, naturally assuming the absolute worst. Then came this staggering update. Nicholas was found alive in Linares, Spain. The family got a miracle call saying he had been kidnapped by a trafficking ring, moved all the way to Europe, and had finally escaped. His sister Carrie immediately jumped on a plane to Spain to bring him home.
But here's where this miracle story instantly stops making sense. The real Nicholas was an American kid with blonde hair and blue eyes. The person they recovered, he had dark hair, brown eyes, and spoke with a very, very heavy French accent. His excuse for this? It is completely baffling. He literally told the family his captors performed bizarre chemical experiments to change his eye and hair color to hide his identity. I mean, wow. Let's move on and see how this builds, because this bizarre excuse unraveled incredibly fast into an explosive revelation. A film crew was actually documenting his return, and they brought along a highly skeptical private investigator. That investigator did something so simple. He just filmed the returned boy's ears and compared them to childhood photos of Nicholas. You see, ears don't change shape, and they did not match. This single, clever observation brought the FBI rushing in, who quickly took fingerprints and DNA. And that DNA test revealed an astounding truth. The boy wasn't Nicholas at all. He was Frédéric Pierre Bardin, a 23-year-old notorious French con artist, known as the Chameleon. This guy had already assumed over 500 different identities. He had successfully fooled authorities across 2 continents before he was finally caught and sentenced to 6 years in prison for passport fraud and perjury. But this brings us to a really chilling question. It's perhaps the darkest twist of this entire explainer. Why on earth did the Barkley family blindly accept a 23-year-old dark-haired French stranger as their blonde 13-year-old son? Well, Frédéric himself dropped a massive bombshell. He claimed the family wasn't fooled at all. He said they knew he was fake right from the start and were actively playing along. The suspicions compiled by investigators are deeply, deeply unsettling. Frédéric alleged that Nicholas's sister, Carrie, actually fed him family knowledge to help him pass the police tests. Investigators also looked back at an unexplained 911 call Jason made 3 months after the original disappearance, where he claimed Nicholas was breaking into the garage, which is actually a common tactic used to make a victim appear alive. The popular, though unproven theory that investigators and Frédéric landed on was that Jason may have murdered Nicholas, and the family used Frédéric as a convenient cover-up. But before Jason could be thoroughly investigated, he tragically died from a fatal overdose, taking any potential answers straight to the grave with him. Which leaves us staring at this final, really haunting reality. We've untangled the unbelievable twists in these cases today, the hidden identities, the fake aliases, the imposters. But despite pulling back the curtain on these incredible Hollywood-level mysteries, the ultimate fates of the original innocent victims remain completely unknown. What truly happened to little Michael, Gregory, and Nicholas? It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the most complex puzzles leave the most important pieces missing. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this challenged the way you view the fragile line between—
Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely chilling, true account of a mountain camping trip that just descends into absolute terror. We're unpacking a really detailed first-hand experience from a traveler navigating the remote northern peaks of Pakistan. And look, this isn't just your standard campfire tale. It's a meticulous breakdown of what happens when your deepest fears of the unknown become an undeniable physical reality.
I want you to just think about this for a second. Imagine waking up in the pitch black of a remote mountain meadow, only to hear your kids laughing and playing just outside your tent. Sounds innocent enough, right? But here's the terrifying catch. You know for an absolute fact that your kids are locked safely inside your truck. Okay, so let's dive into this timeline and break down exactly how this night of unimaginable dread unfolded.
Section 1. The ultimate camping setup. Now, to really grasp the sheer helplessness of this whole situation, you first have to meet our protagonist, Saqib. He is a highly experienced outdoorsman. He spent years navigating treacherous terrains, landslips, snowstorms, you name it. He takes his family out in this heavily modified vintage camper truck. We are talking oversized, ultra-thick tires, a high suspension to clear rough rocky terrain, heavy-duty winches, and massive bumpers. The back is basically a fully self-sufficient camper. It's got solar power, extra batteries, dry rations, medical kits, and he even carries a legal weapon for extreme emergencies. This intense physical preparation creates an immense, yet, as you'll see, ultimately false sense of security.
So you might be wondering, how does a guy this prepared lose total control? Well, let's trace the chronological tick-tock of this ordeal. They head out of the city at 9:30 p.m. just to avoid traffic. By midnight, they're deep into these uncharted mountain roads. Fast forward to 3 a.m., and the supernatural escalation peaks with an impossible doppelganger, leading to a desperate, completely silent escape at dawn.
Section 2. The Dark Mountain Road. So, hours into the drive, the comfortable paved highways completely disappear. They're replaced by a pitch-black, narrow dirt road hugging a sheer rock wall on one side and this terrifyingly steep drop into an unseen ravine on the other. Saqib had installed these super intense off-road lights, but as he actually noted, it felt like the darkness was heavier, literally swallowing the light. You can imagine the heavy tires just loudly crunching against loose mountain stones, and this really eerie unease starts to mount. Saqib, who normally memorizes routes perfectly, starts missing expected turns. It's like the geography itself just feels wrong.
Section 3. The Invisible Predator.
Suddenly, the truck jerks to a violent halt. The blaring headlights illuminate this wolf-like animal frozen dead in the center of the dirt road. Saqib blays on the horn. But here's the crazy part. A wild animal should immediately bolt from blinding lights and a blaring truck horn, right? This one doesn't. Its hair is standing on end. Its front paws are dug deep into the dirt, and it's ignoring the truck entirely. Instead, it's staring off to the left into the dark, silent forest. It is utterly terrified of something lurking in the trees.
And then, the impossible happens. Rustling erupts from the dry leaves in the dark woods, and the animal's entire body is suddenly violently yanked into the air. It doesn't jump. It is physically lifted by an unseen, invisible force. It lets out this unnatural, agonizing scream, a sound of pure terror, and is violently dragged backward right into the dark trees. The family is just left there, paralyzed in the truck, staring at an empty road.
Section 4. Shadows in the Meadow. Shaken to their absolute core, they push forward and finally reach a high mountain meadow, this flat clearing way up in the peaks. Saqib locks the three children safely inside the reinforced camper truck, while he and his wife Aisha set up a small sleeping tent just outside. The silence up here is absolute. No wind, no bugs, just dead quiet. But as Saqib is heating up some food, that dead quiet is completely shattered. They hear crushed rocks echoing from the pitch-black ravine right next to the meadow. Then comes this unbearable tension. Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps climbing straight up the sheer cliff face. Saqib grabs his powerful flashlight and shines it over the edge. For just a split second, a dark head briefly peers over, followed by a stone loudly rolling back down into the abyss, but there's no one there.
They retreat to their tent, fraught with anxiety. It's exactly 3 a.m. when Saqib is half asleep and vividly hears the sound of their tent zipper slowly opening and then closing. He snaps awake. His wife's sleeping bag is empty.
He rushes outside. In the dim light, he spots his wife, Aisha, walking silently toward the dark woods, her head bowed. He shouts her name, but she completely ignores him. He actually runs toward her, shining a bright flashlight directly on her back, but she doesn't even flinch. And then, a voice calls out from behind him. It's Aisha. His real wife is standing safely back at the camper truck door, terrified, asking him who he's yelling at in the dark. Saqib whips back around to the woods. The figure in the flashlight beam has vanished instantly into thin air. Retreating to the tent, completely horrified, they are subjected to a terrifying auditory phenomenon. In the dead silence, they suddenly hear a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. It sounds exactly like an invisible axe striking a tree, moving closer and closer until it sounds like it's hitting a trunk right in front of Saqib. He goes out to confront whoever it is, but again, no one is there, and there isn't a single physical mark left on any of the trees.
Section 5. The voice mimics.
So, Saqib and Aisha somehow managed to drift into an exhausted sleep, only to be jolted awake in the pitch black by a sound that defies all logic. They hear the clear, distinct sounds of their children laughing and running around in the grass right outside the tent. They can even hear their older son's unique laugh, his slight pause for breath. Saqib moves to get up, but Aisha grabs his arm in sheer terror and whispers, "These are not our children." And she's right. Their actual kids are locked safely inside the reinforced steel truck. Whatever is outside is perfectly mimicking them.
The psychological horror reaches a literal breaking point here. Suddenly, from outside, Aisha hears her very own voice call out from the darkness, flat and eerie. "Don't go there, there's a ditch." And then Saqib hears his own voice respond, "Let them play, nothing will happen." I mean, imagine sitting in terrified silence inside a thin tent while an exact auditory replay of your own family plays out in the dark meadow just inches away.
Then, things get physical. The mimicked laughter starts rapidly circling the outside of their tent. A heavy, unseen hand presses down on the thin fabric right beside them. Invisible fingers begin slowly, deliberately tugging at the tent's zipper from the outside. In sheer desperation, Aisha begins furiously reciting prayers aloud. As she does, the pressure on the tent stops, the laughter fades. But then, massive, heavy footsteps slowly walk away from the tent and head straight toward the camper truck where their children are sleeping. Then, from the direction of the truck, two distinct, incredibly heavy metallic taps echo loudly in the night. Ton, ton. It is a chilling, physical sign that a massive entity is standing right beside the thin metal walls protecting their sleeping children. They just keep reciting their prayers until, suddenly, every sound in the meadow vanishes at once. Section 6. The Dawn Escape. As the sun finally rises, the paranormal activity just ceases, and the family packs up and flees down the mountain in dead silence. When they finally reach safety, we're left with this terrifying juxtaposition. On one hand, you have Saqib's intense physical preparation, guns, heavy winches, medical kits, and massive tires built to conquer literally anything nature throws his way. But on the other hand, you have complete paranormal vulnerability. Against invisible mimics that can manipulate your own senses, physically drag wild animals into the dark, and perfectly replicate the voices of those you love most, all that physical preparation means absolutely nothing.
Which leaves us with this final, deeply unsettling thought to take away from this explainer on mountain folklore. Imagine you're miles from civilization, entirely surrounded by the suffocating darkness of a deep forest. If you were trapped in that dark, and you clearly heard your own voice calling out to you,